Today we're delighted to put Larry McDonald on. Most of you know that he is one of the younger members of the John Birch Council, very active in John Birch affairs in the Atlanta region and throughout Georgia, a very distinguished surgeon on his own, the son of another very distinguished surgeon, and a devoted American. And it is a pleasure always to have Larry McDonald with us.
Thank you, Colonel. It's certainly a pleasure to be once again a part of the New England Rally for God, Family, and Country, and I think that is a very unique and marked distinction across the country for the very two great Americans, Colonel Bunker and Mrs. McKinney, who have worked tirelessly to make this a part of the regular American scene around the 4th of July weekend period. This is a unique part of each New England Rally for God, Family, and Country, because as Colonel Bunker has already explained, there frequently have been special guest speakers from distant parts whose personal schedules have been sometimes not completed up until the last minute, and this is certainly the case this year. These speakers will present for you a unique educational treat, and the first speaker is the gentleman to my right, is a native of Pakistan. He is now on his 6th lecture tour of the United States and was born in Karachi. After completing his schooling and part of his college education at Karachi, Pakistan, Father de Souza joined the Society of Jesus in 1938. He studied rhetoric and humanities at Sacred Heart College, Shimbaganur in South India, and attained his licentiate in philosophy from the Gregorian University in Rome. Father de Souza completed his theological studies in Spain and secured his licentiate in sacred theology from the Pontifical University in Comedia, Spain in 1951. He is president and founder of a college for untouchables, which is the lowest and most untouchable stratum of the caste system in India. He is also president of the All India Association of Christian Colleges, made up of some 170 various colleges throughout that land. Father de Souza will be proceeding from Boston to Rome, where he will be taking part of in the Jesuit Educational Coordinating Center, which is working towards general coordination in the Jesuit educational institutions throughout the world. His subject today is the Indo-Pakistan tragedy, and it is certainly a distinct pleasure and honor to welcome to the New England Rally for God, Family, and Country, Father Herbert de Souza.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald, Colonel Bunker, Mrs. McKinney, and my dear friends. I feel doubly privileged to stand before you here this afternoon. In the first place, I feel privileged to have been, thanks to the generosity and courtesy of Colonel Bunker and Anna McKinney, to be present at these proceedings, which have impressed me and encouraged me tremendously. And I feel especially privileged to stand before you this afternoon to share with you some of the apprehensions which lower upon us in Asia, because we are part of Asia, and press down upon your shoulders because, alas, Asia has become part of your responsibility as well. Following in the footsteps of Father Fenton, I feel a grave apprehension, not only because of my inability to meet the standards that he has set, but because I also feel like that character in Chesterton's ballad of the White Horse. To an army already besieged and beset, the commander comes forth and addresses them. And he says to them, "Yea, I promise you nothing, yea, nothing for your desire, but that the sky grows darker yet, and the sea rises higher. For that, alas, will be part of my task here this afternoon, to tell you, or to reiterate for your benefit, the fears that now lower over Asia. For many years now, and for at least the last 8 or 10 years, the eyes of America have turned towards Asia, once in hope, then in optimism, then in an exalted expectancy of victory, then in a dubious apprehension of survival, and now, it would seem, against the gathering clouds of despair. The talk today is of cutting losses and emerging from that bloodied and futile battlefield. The talk today, especially in the recent weeks since the publication of certain so-called secret documents, is one of the collapse of credibility. And my dubious distinction here this evening is to tell you of one gap of credibility which history has closed, of one international leader who spoke the truth and more than he suspected or you feared. For many decades ago, Lenin had said that communism would finally encompass Europe, but by way of Pekin and Calcutta. And this was in days when Peking and Calcutta, both of them represented the very zeniths of civilizations which could not conceivably be expected to surrender to communism. China, with its tremendous devotion to tradition, to family, to ancestors, how could China ever be expected to swear allegiance to a creed which violated traditions and defied ancestors and disintegrated family? And yet it was to be so. And India, for the last 5,000 years, the home and cradle of 3 great religions of the world, whose spirituality seems to be so deeply woven into the very warp and woof of Indian culture, of Indian life. How could India ever be expected to surrender to communism? And yet China has gone, and India teeters on the brink. I would like to recall this afternoon some of the factors that have led to this seemingly imminent collapse. When the British were in charge of India, there was always the firm belief that India was one of the most invulnerable countries of the world. To the north, it was barricaded by the almost impassable Himalaya mountains. To the east, to the west, and to the south were the vast oceans that kept India away from the influences of both the west, other than the British Empire, and the east, other than China. The British have gone, and the Himalayas have crumbled like pebbles upon an eroding seashore. The Chinese have crossed the Himalayas and have stood upon the edge of that vast Indo-Gangetic plain as the Mughals once stood many years ago, and the Huns once stood many centuries ago. And it was said those many centuries ago, and it is still valid today, that he who controls the Indo-Gangetic plain controls India. And he who controls India holds mastery of Asia itself. And he who holds mastery of Asia can well hold dominion over the entire world. How is it that India has crumpled so easily and without too much of a struggle? There are three factors that I would draw your attention to. The first is a physical one. It is the fact that with modern technology, geography ceases to be a barrier. For the Himalayas can be crossed as easily as space can be traversed. The second is a political one, that the British, having left India, left it in something approaching a shambles. It was always a policy of Britain to divide and to conquer. And even when she left India divided and conquered. There was India and there was Pakistan. Of Pakistan, I shall have more to say a little later. But there were two other factors. And the first factor India has shared with many another nation, including, as I would gather from your own political analysts, this great nation. And that is that communism is not as bad as it is painted. And that coexistence with it is indeed possible. Pandit Nehru, the first great prime minister of my country, was certainly sustained by this belief. A child of Harrow and Cambridge, he had grown up to suspect the decadent culture of the West. He had grown up to realize that democracy, just like communism, is not always what it is vaunted to be. And so he looked towards Asia for the sustenance of the great traditions, and in the hope that he could recapture, by turning his back upon the West, that first great careless rapture of Asian civilization. And in particular, he turned to China, which shared with India the distinction of being two of the greatest and oldest civilizations of this planet. And in spite of his political advisors, in spite of the warnings of political analysts from the West, he brought India closer and closer to China, until one never to be forgotten morning, he found that the Himalayas, that once impregnable barrier of India to the north, was crowded with Chinese soldiers. Soldiers who had been trained to fight at 19 and 24 and 25,000 feet. And the Indian soldiers were lifted up from the Indo-Gangetic plain to 19,000 feet to repel the Chinese invaders. Three things happened. In the first place, their guns, the Indian guns, refused to fire. Secondly, the clothing that they wore on the plains proved to be utterly inadequate at 19,000 feet. And the Indian soldier found, last but not least, that he could not breathe at 19,000 feet. And so the entire plain of India lay at the feet of China. This country did indeed rush aid to India, but it was not the American aid to India that saved India. It was not the strength of India that saved India. It was not the inadequacy of China that saved India. It was, in the deepest sense, the inscrutability of the Chinese mind and of Chinese strategy that saved India. For standing over the plain of India, standing like the Assyrian wolf over the fold, the Chinese army folded their tents and silently stole back to China. And no one, neither in India nor in the West, has ever been able to explain why. The only reason that makes sense is this: that China has shown she can be master of India and master of Asia. And not the might of India or the might of the West will save India when China so chooses. What will happen when she will have only the might of India to protect India from China, and the might of the West will have become an ally of China? That, of course, boggles the Indian mind. That is the second factor that we have to keep in consideration when discussing the Indian tragedy. The communists have already penetrated India in other ways. There are two states of India, Bengal in the east and Kerala in the south, that are already controlled and ruled by the communists, who have come in by democratic procedures. And the only reason perhaps why these two forces have not been allied for the further conquest of India is this: a strange irony of history, that Kerala owes its allegiance to Russia and Calcutta to China, and the two of them cannot get together. And this is some indication of the parlous state in which India finds itself, is that there are many who hope that the Russian communists will come to India before the Chinese. For the Chinese methods are dastardly and bloody and inhuman. The Chinese methods are very much akin to the massacres that have been common in Africa. The Chinese methods are very literally hatchet methods. We are told almost daily of politicians, industrialists, social leaders who have their names noted down in a little black book. And every day, in almost every town and city of Bengal, there will be 10 here and 10 there, 10 leaders, 10 educators, 10 politicians, who will be found hacked to pieces by the Chinese communists. And they say, and I fear that they say rightly, it'll only be a matter of time before China moves her forces, not her armies, but her political forces, through Bengal into the rest of the country. Desperate as this situation is, there is one other factor which complicates it and brings it to the very verge of disaster, and that is the famine situation in India. India is at the mercy of the monsoons, the seasonal rains that come upon it or do not come upon it in the months between July and September. For the last 10 years, those rains have been particularly scarce. For the last 10 years, many a city and state in India has been on the verge of famine. I would like to take this occasion to express on behalf of my countrymen in India the gratitude that that country feels towards this nation for the help it has so generously extended. Which is not to say that that help has always reached the people to whom it has been given. There are estimates today that the food that has been produced in India could, if but men were honest enough, reach every single inhabitant of the country. There are estimates that if the food could only be protected from rats, there might be enough to feed a great part of the population of India. But an American economist has estimated that perhaps 30% of the food produced in India is eaten up by rats, and another 40% eaten up by rats too, except that they are of the human breed. And only 30% is left for the rest of the population. This pressure then of population upon food, this inability will drive many into the hands of the communists. And there is one other fear. It has always been said that the devil you know is more to be regarded than the devil you don't. I speak now not of my own convictions, but of a feeling that is rapidly gaining ground in India. And that is, it were better to make friends with the mammon of iniquity that lies beyond its borders, to wit, China, than this country, for all its vaunted upholding of anti-communist principles, and for all its vaunted protection of democracy itself. And there are two reasons for this apprehension. The first is that America is 13,000 miles away from India, and that the day that China chooses to invade, possess, and encompass my country, the help from America will be too little or too late. Vietnam has taught another lesson, rightly or wrongly, to the country, that even if it is not too little or not too late, it will still be more disastrous for India than if it had never come at all. But there is a third factor that has recently entered the scene. And for all my love of this country and its people, and for all my regard for the ideals of this nation, I have not yet been able to attain a comprehension of the principles that have underlied certain international activities of the United States of America. I see no reason for applause, but only for tears. And the reason is this. In yesterday's paper, it was mentioned that this country had decided to resume aid to Pakistan. Now, there was one statement above all others, which Father Fenton made before me, with which I find myself unable to agree. Two statements, really. One is that we cannot rely upon the churches to save the country for God. But I would rather not enter into that at this moment. There is a second one, and that is that if we know the truth, and in the measure that we know the truth, we shall be armed for combat. And I would say that the entire history of mankind is proof that it is not enough to know the truth. For the truth can be made available to us, and yet we lack the vision or the will to embrace it. And it is my belief that the truth is available to this nation and to the people of this country. But it is there amidst a multitude of competing theories and versions and attitudes and philosophies and theologies and the lack of them. And in between them, the vision is obscured and the will is undermined for action. This, I think, is the ultimate tragedy of mankind, to have seen the truth and yet lacked the strength to have risen to its demands. Now, this truth that I am about to suggest to you is available to you. It is available in your newspapers, even in those newspapers which contain truths that are fit to print. And one of them is this, that this country has on 3 very crucial occasions offered its help to Pakistan. I should mention, only for the sake of the record, that although I was born in Karachi and grew up in Karachi, and Karachi has been the capital of Pakistan, I am not a native Pakistani. I grew up in Pakistan I grew up in Karachi when it was part of the British Empire. I lived part of my life in Goa just after it left the Portuguese Empire, came to India when it was barely convalescing from both these empires, and am now a citizen of India. Now, there were 3 occasions I mentioned when the United States offered help to Pakistan. The first was when, having despaired of India and India's democratic principles, because the American ambassadors in India had so informed this government, America turned to Pakistan as the great hope of democracy in Asia. Pakistan corresponded by refusing to let the U-2 planes land in Pakistan or work out of Pakistan. This country corresponded by giving more arms to Pakistan on the condition that they were never to be used against India, but only against communism. That was in 1961 to 1964. In 1965 was the Indo-Pakistan War. And the boundary between the 2 countries was littered with Sherman tanks and Patton tanks, which had been given by this nation to Pakistan for the defense of Asia against communism, and never to be used against Asia. Today there is a further tragedy that has come to pass. The civil war between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. This goes right back to the very formation of Pakistan, to which I alluded at the very beginning of my talk. West Pakistan is Muslim with a strong Mughal tradition. They consider themselves the first-class citizens of Pakistan. East Pakistan is Muslim, but very largely Hindu converts to Islam, and in the eyes of the Muslims, generally speaking, second-class citizens of Pakistan. However, the natural resources of Pakistan are to be found in East Pakistan, and the natural predators of those resources are to be found in West Pakistan. This situation increased for about 10 years, until at the beginning of this year it became obvious that unless there was a certain equality of distribution of resources between East and West Pakistan, Pakistan would disintegrate. President Yahya Khan of Pakistan therefore decided there would be elections anew, which was a truly democratic gesture. Unfortunately, like so many other democratic gestures, it was to be the first step to a dictatorship. For East Pakistan in these elections gained enough seats, or rather one particular party, the Awami League, gained enough seats not only to control East Pakistan, but the whole of the Pakistan legislature. At which, of course, West Pakistan, seeing the crumbling of all its riches and hopes, declared that the East Pakistan elections were a danger to democracy, and declared martial law in East Pakistan, and sent out the army to exterminate as ruthlessly as it could these so-called East Pakistani rebels. It is said that within the first 3 or 4 days there must have been approximately 60 to 70,000 deaths at the hands of the West Pakistan army. Immediately, the flow of refugees began to India. To date, there have been 4.5 million refugees from Pakistan to India. Unfortunately, as East Pakistan is contiguous with Bengal, most of the refugees have come to Bengal. Bengal already is a communist state, and the pressure of 4.5 million people upon a state already in political turmoil and beset by famine and drought over these many years has created so devastating a situation that in order to diminish the flow of refugees and to diminish too the number of refugees already in Bengal, we have it on fairly reliable authority that there are groups of Indians who go around pouring raw sewage into the drinking water of the refugee camps, so that at one fell swoop we could eliminate the refugees from East Pakistan. India has come to the rescue of these refugees and of East Pakistan, for it is the most blatant example of genocide that we have had since Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Almost every nation in the world has decided that West Pakistan is not to get any help at all until it makes an accommodation with East Pakistan and that democratic elections can continue as they were begun. For some reason which escapes me at this moment, after promising the Indian ambassador that it would fall in line with the other nations in the hope of bringing this genocide to a halt, the day before yesterday, President Nixon announced that he would continue help to West Pakistan, and in particular a help of arms to West Pakistan. These arms, of course, which are being used right at the moment to destroy East Pakistan. As I say, to us in India, to us broadly in Asia, these steps are incomprehensible. I am sure that your government has excellent and persuasive reasons for continuing to assist this government in its present attempts to destroy East Pakistan. I'm sure your government sees things in a larger and wider and perhaps a more far-reaching context than we are able to do. But one result or one consequence is, I'm afraid, inevitable. And that is that in a crunch, when lives really are at stake and freedom is in danger, and even the basics of life in jeopardy, the greatest arsenal of democracy has perhaps a tendency to pass its ammunition to the opposite side. There is a story that goes the rounds in India, which perhaps might sum up the feelings of that country today. It is said that a group of very noble and idealistic Peace Corps workers came to one of the tribes in India. And they came and told them, we belong to the United States of America. And the people cried out with one voice, Hosanga. And the speaker continued, this is one nation that has never gone out in conquest of mankind, never been an imperialistic nation. And the crowd cried out, Hosanga. And this continued the leader, we have come here out of the goodness of our hearts to help you rise and be a great nation. And the crowd cried out, Hosanga. And, said the leader, we know that you have often been troubled with drought and with famine. We have come here to help you. And the crowd cried out, Hosanga. And, said the leader, we know that agriculture is the basis of your prosperity, and we have come here to help you with your fields and especially with your cattle, for this is the land of the sacred cow and the sacred bull. And the crowd cried out, Hosanga. And now, said the leader, let us stop all these great theorizings and come down to practical things. May we come and see your barns, and especially we would like to inspect your cattle, and your bulls. And the crowd said, come, these are our barns. Come right in, but just watch that you don't step into the hosanga. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you are greatly concerned about the limitations of the export of hosanga throughout the entire world. All I can ask and pray for is success in your efforts, that if the supply be not utterly curtailed, at least it be greatly limited. And as Father Fenton said so well, our final hope for democracy and for peace, our final hope for mankind itself, will not be in princes, but in the strength and power of God. I would ask you to join me in a prayer for a great poet and mystic of my country, Rabindranath Tagore, who was also a great admirer of your ideals, your nation, and your people. And I would like to conclude with the words of his prayer. Where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and freedom, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. God bless you. God bless you.
As Colonel Bunker mentioned, Father de Souza has a very tight schedule even today, and however will be with us once again tomorrow.